The courtroom erupts in stunned silence as Judge Hargrove laughs openly at Marcus Johnson's tears. "You expect me to believe anything coming from you?" he sneers, dismissing crucial evidence that could free the innocent black teacher. No one dares challenge him until the heavy oak doors swing open. A tall figure walks down the center aisle, causing the judge's face to drain of color. The newcomer's presence sends shockwaves through the courtroom, and suddenly everything changes. Marcus realizes this moment will either save him or destroy him completely. Could one unexpected arrival truly overturn a system designed to fail? Him? If you believe in justice for all, not just the privileged few, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you stand for equality in our justice system, subscribe because tomorrow's special episode reveals what really happens when power meets accountability. Marcus Johnson's day began like any other Thursday at Roosevelt High School. The history teacher was mid-lecture about civil rights movements when the classroom door burst open. 5 police officers stormed in, weapons drawn. Students gasped and froze in terror. "Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest for armed robbery. Put your hands where we can see them," barked the lead officer, Detective James Murphy, a stocky man with cold eyes. "There must be some mistake," Marcus protested as students watched in horror. His carefully built reputation crumbled in seconds as handcuffs bit into his wrists. The students who had respected him moments ago now stared with uncertainty and fear. "Sir, please, I was teaching all day yesterday when this supposedly happened," Marcus explained calmly despite his racing heart. "My students can verify that. This is a mistake." Detective Murphy ignored him completely. "We have fingerprints, eyewitness identification, and video footage. Save it for the judge." Marcus was paraded through school hallways, where colleagues watched in shock. Outside, local news cameras waited. Someone had tipped them off. The perp walk was clearly orchestrated for maximum humiliation. At the station, Marcus repeatedly asked to call his teenage daughter Journey, but requests were denied. During questioning, Detective Murphy mentioned the victim was Charles Wentworth, a prominent real estate developer and major donor to the district attorney's re-election campaign. The robbery had occurred at Wentworth's downtown office. "I've never even been inside his building," Marcus insisted. "I was teaching when this happened. 28 students and 2 faculty members can confirm this." "Funny how you criminals always have an alibi," Murphy sneered. "We have your fingerprints on the weapon and the stolen items. A witness picked you out of a lineup. Your protests won't help you." Marcus had never been arrested before. The public defender assigned to him, Simone Carter, seemed fresh out of law school and overwhelmed. When they met briefly before his arraignment, she shuffled through paperwork with nervous energy. "They're saying your fingerprints were found on the gun and on Mr. Wentworth's desk," she said, frowning. "And there's apparently a witness who identified you with 100% certainty. That's impossible. I've never held a gun in my life, and I was teaching when this happened. The prosecution has a surveillance photo they claim shows you entering the building." She showed him a grainy image of a tall black man whose face wasn't clearly visible. "That's not me. You can see that's not me." Simone nodded hesitantly. "I'll request the full footage. Something doesn't add up." That night in jail, Marcus experienced another reality. White inmates received prompt medical attention, while black inmates' requests were lost. Guards addressed white detainees by name, but called black inmates boy or worse. Marcus was placed in a cell with violent offenders despite his non-violent charge and lack of record. At 2 a.m., a guard whispered to his cellmate, who then tried to stab Marcus with a makeshift weapon. Only Marcus's quick reflexes saved him from serious injury. When he reported the attack, the guard said he didn't see anything and suggested Marcus stop causing trouble. Through the long night, Marcus thought of his daughter Journey. At 16, she was too young to face this alone. His ex-wife lived across the country. Who would take care of Journey if he couldn't get out? The text message he'd received just before his arrest now haunted him. "Dad, I aced my history test. Can't wait to tell you all about it tonight." She would come home to an empty house, wondering where her father was. In the morning, Marcus learned he would appear before Judge William Hargrove, known informally among defendants as Hanging Hargrove, for his harsh sentences for people of color. Another inmate told him, "If you got Hargrove and you're black, start packing for Guy." Prison now. That man sends white kids home for the same thing that gets us years. As Marcus was led to court, Detective Murphy passed by with a smirk. Judge Hargrove and Mr. Wentworth play golf together every Sunday. Good luck with that alibi. Marcus stood before Judge William Hargrove's bench, his hands and feet shackled despite having no history of violence. The contrast was stark earlier. A white defendant facing similar charges had been allowed to wear business attire with no restraints. Judge Hargrove, a 63-year-old man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, barely glanced at Marcus before focusing on the case file. "Armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and resisting arrest," he read in a bored tone. "How does the defendant plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Marcus replied firmly. The judge's eyes narrowed with immediate hostility. "You will speak when—" "I ask you a direct question," he snapped. Simone Carter stood straighter. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. We request reasonable bail. Mr. Johnson is a respected teacher with deep community ties, no criminal record, and is the sole caretaker of his teenage daughter." District Attorney Richard Clayton rose smoothly. "The state requests denial of bail, Your Honor. The defendant committed armed robbery against a prominent citizen. The evidence is overwhelming, including fingerprints, eyewitness identification, and surveillance footage. He's clearly a danger to society." "My client was teaching a classroom full of students during the alleged robbery," Simone countered. "We have 28 student witnesses and 2 faculty members who can verify his whereabouts. The supposed evidence contradicts physical reality." Judge Hargrove waved dismissively. "Save it for trial, counselor. Bail is set at $500,000, Marcus gasped. 6 figures for a first-time alleged offender with community ties was unprecedented. Earlier, a white defendant facing similar charges had received bail of $25,000. "Your Honor," Simone protested, "that amount is prohibitively high and amounts to no bail at all. My client poses no flight risk. The prosecution's evidence is contradictory on its face." "We have witnesses, counselor," Judge Hargrove interrupted. Sharply, "One more word questioning my decision and I'll hold you in contempt. Bail is set at $500,000. Next case." As Marcus was led away, he noticed a pattern. Every black defendant received excessive bail or none at all, while white defendants facing similar or more serious charges received reasonable amounts. One white defendant charged with assault with a deadly weapon was released on his own recognizance because he had strong community ties, the exact argument Hargrove had dismissed for Marcus. In the holding area, Marcus whispered to Simone, "This is clearly biased. Can we request?" "Another judge?" "We can file a motion, but Judge Hargrove rarely recuses himself, and the chief judge is his golfing buddy." Her frustration was evident. "I'm sorry, Marcus. The system shouldn't work this way." As they spoke, a court observer slipped Simone a folded note before quickly walking away. She opened it discreetly. "Not the first time. I have information. Meet me at Liberty Cafe tomorrow, 3 p.m. J.R." "Are you as outraged as I am by this blatant double standard in our justice system?" Comment number 1. If you believe all defendants deserve equal treatment regardless of race. Like and subscribe if you want to see justice prevail in Marcus's case. Can a system this corrupted ever deliver true justice? Or will Marcus become just another statistic? Stay tuned to see how deep this discrimination runs. County detention was worse than Marcus had imagined. The overcrowded facility reeked of desperation and institutional neglect. As a teacher who'd always followed rules and respected authority, Marcus found himself in a world where those concepts meant nothing. His first week revealed how privilege and prejudice operated even behind bars. When he developed a painful infection from an untreated cut, his request for medical attention was lost 3 times. A white inmate with a headache received immediate care. "Your paperwork keeps disappearing," a guard named Brennan explained, with thinly veiled amusement. Must be bad luck. Marcus learned to sleep lightly. 2 black inmates had been badly beaten during routine cell checks that somehow only targeted certain demographics. Guards looked the other way when white supremacist gang members threatened black inmates, but black inmates received harsh discipline for minor infractions. During his 3rd week, Marcus was cornered in the shower by 3 men with makeshift weapons. Judge Hargrove sends his regards, one whispered before slashing at him. Marcus narrowly escaped serious injury by creating a distraction and alerting a guard, but not before receiving a deep gash on his arm. When he reported the attack, the supervising officer responded, "Maybe stop causing trouble, Johnson. Some people want you to get the message." The message was clear. Someone powerful wanted to ensure Marcus had no chance to mount an effective defense. Phone privileges were another area of discrimination. Marcus was repeatedly denied calls to his daughter Journey, his only family contact. "Systems down for your section," guards would claim, while inmates in other sections freely made calls. One day in the common area, Marcus met Reggie Washington, a former court clerk now serving time for drug possession. After establishing trust, Reggie shared valuable information. "Hargrove has been doing this for years," Reggie explained quietly. "He's part of a system. They target educated black men, especially anyone who might challenge the status quo. I worked in that courthouse for 7 years and saw the pattern. How does he get away with it?" Marcus asked. "Connections. His college roommate is now chief judge. His wife's brother runs the police commission. The DA's office and certain detectives work with him to select cases. They manipulate evidence, pressure witnesses, whatever it takes. They've sent dozens of innocent black men to prison while letting white defendants walk for the same crimes. There must be records, complaints," Marcus protested. "All buried. Anyone who speaks up gets targeted. One public defender filed too many complaints. Suddenly she was arrested for drug possession. Never used a day in her life, but they found cocaine in her car." Another attorney was disbarred after fabricated ethics complaints. A court reporter who tried to document the pattern had her house mysteriously burned down. Marcus thought of his students, how he taught them the justice system, while imperfect, fundamentally worked. How naive that seemed now. Through Reggie, Marcus learned Hargrove had sent 18 black men to prison, in cases with questionable evidence over the past year alone. All had been represented by overworked public defenders. All had faced Detective Murphy or his close colleagues. All had bail set impossibly high. "Your case has their fingerprints all over it," Reggie said. "They've done this dozens of times, but they picked the wrong man with you, teacher. You've got something they don't expect." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "You've got people watching now. Word about your case is spreading. And if enough people see the pattern, maybe something finally changes." That night, Marcus received his first letter from Journey. "Dad, I know you didn't do this," she wrote. "My history teacher said we should document everything when injustice happens, so I'm keeping records and talking to your students. We're going to fight this. Don't lose hope." In his cold cell for the first time since his arrest, Marcus allowed himself to cry. Simone Carter sat across from journalist Julian Reynolds at Liberty Cafe, the source of the mysterious note. After confirming his identity and intentions, Reynolds shared disturbing information. "I've been investigating Judge Hargrove for 18 months, Reynolds explained. "I've documented 57 cases where black defendants received demonstrably harsher treatment than white defendants with identical charges and backgrounds. The pattern is undeniable." "Why hasn't this been published?" Simone asked. "Hargrove has powerful friends. My editor received threats. The paper's owner golfs with the judge. I've been building evidence, gathering testimonies, creating a case. They can't ignore or bury." Reynolds slid a flash drive across the table. "This contains statistical analysis of Hargrove's sentencing patterns, testimony from former defendants, and financial connections between Hargrove, D.A. Clayton, and private prison companies. Marcus isn't just facing a biased judge, he's facing a corrupt system that profits from putting black men in prison." Armed with this background, Simone intensified her investigation. The official case against Marcus was riddled with inconsistencies. The surveillance footage allegedly showing him entering Wentworth's building had technical problems, precisely during the time frame that would have shown his face clearly. The fingerprint analysis had been rushed through by a lab technician with a history of mistakes, but who was repeatedly used by Detective Murphy. Simone's request for the original security footage was denied. Data corruption was the official explanation, though such corruption conveniently only affected potentially exonerating evidence. When she located 3 witnesses who had seen the actual robber, a tall man who looked nothing like Marcus Beyond, also being black, they suddenly became unavailable after visits from Detective Murphy. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Journey Johnson proved to be her father's daughter. Methodical and fearless, she gathered signed statements from every student in her father's class, confirming his presence during the robbery. She photographed the classroom sign-in logs and security footage from school hallways, showing Marcus throughout the day. Most significantly, Journey identified a potential suspect, Darius Wesley, an ex-convict who matched the actual witness descriptions and had been seen near Wentworth's building. When Simone tried to investigate Wesley, she found police had never questioned him despite multiple tips pointing his way. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Eliza Bennett, a forensic technician in the police lab, contacted Simone through a secure channel. "The fingerprint match they're claiming is scientifically impossible," Dr. Bennett explained. "The prints from the crime scene were partial and smudged, categorized as inconclusive in my initial report." Somehow, that became a 100% match to Marcus Johnson in the official filing. "Someone altered my findings." "Would you testify to this?" Simone asked. Dr. Bennett hesitated. "I'd lose my job, possibly my career. But yes, if it comes to that. This isn't the first time my work has been manipulated, but it's the most blatant case." Simone also discovered financial connections between Judge Hargrove and D.A. Clayton. Both had investments in Pinnacle Corrections Corporation, a private prison company that received $40,000 per year for each inmate from county cases. Both men had experienced remarkable financial growth since their partnership began. Most disturbing was the connection to Charles Wentworth, the alleged robbery victim. His development company had recently acquired property near Roosevelt High School property that had been denied zoning changes until Marcus led a community petition against gentrification. Wentworth had publicly stated his frustration with interfering teachers who don't understand economics. The picture becoming clear was not just of racial bias, but of deliberate targeting. Marcus wasn't randomly selected. He was specifically chosen for removal from his community. When Simone presented these findings to Marcus, his resignation turned to determination. "They're not just coming after me," he realized. "They're silencing anyone who challenges their power. This is bigger than my case." The evidence was mounting, but so were the obstacles. Judge Hargrove would oversee the pre-trial hearings. Any evidence Simone presented would first need his approval to be admitted at trial. The very man orchestrating the injustice would decide what evidence of his actions the jury could see. "We need to build public awareness," Simone decided. "If enough people are watching, they can't bury this completely." Just as Simone began preparing motions, she received a threatening phone call. "Drop this case now, or you'll be joining your client behind bars. We have ways of making evidence appear when we need it." The next day, a small package arrived at her office. Inside was a clear plastic bag containing cocaine and a note. "Ready to be planted whenever necessary. Final warning. What happens when those sworn to uphold justice become the very architects of injustice? Comment number 1 if you believe whistleblowers like Dr. Bennett are the true heroes our system needs. Like this video if you want to see Simone and Journey expose this corruption, and subscribe to follow their dangerous journey for truth. Will their evidence be enough to overcome a system designed to silence them, or are they simply collecting proof of their own destruction? The battle for Marcus's freedom is just beginning. The Jefferson County Courthouse loomed like a fortress as Simone Carter prepared for the crucial pre-trial hearing. This was where key decisions about admissible evidence would be made, decisions that would largely determine Marcus's fate before the trial even began. Journey sat in the front row of the gallery, notebook in hand, documenting everything. Several of Marcus's students and colleagues had come to show support, along with journalist Julian Reynolds and a small group of community activists alerted to the case. Judge Hargrove entered, his expression souring at the sight of observers. "This is not a public spectacle," he snapped. "Any disruptions and I'll clear the courtroom." The proceedings began with Simone's motion to admit the complete school attendance records and security footage, proving Marcus was teaching during the robbery. Your Honor, these records conclusively establish that my client was physically elsewhere during the crime. 28 students and 2 faculty members have signed affidavits confirming his continuous presence. D.A. Clayton rose smoothly. Your Honor, these signatures could easily have been coerced by the defendant's daughter, who we know has been inappropriately interfering with witnesses. As for school security footage, it's grainy and inconclusive. Anyone could have signed that attendance log. Judge Hargrove nodded, as if they'd rehearsed this exchange. Motion denied. The documentation is deemed unreliable. Simone maintained her composure despite the absurdity. Your Honor, we also move to admit testimony from Dr. Eliza Bennett regarding inconsistencies in the fingerprint analysis. Objection, Clayton interjected. Dr. Bennett is not the official case technician of record. Her opinions are speculative and irrelevant. Dr. Bennett conducted the initial analysis that was later altered, Simone countered. She can testify to scientific facts about fingerprint matching that directly contradict the prosecution's claims. Judge Hargrove's expression hardened. Motion denied. Dr. Bennett's testimony would only confuse the jury with technical details. The official report stands. One by one, Simone's evidence was systematically excluded. The testimony of 3 witnesses who saw someone else commit the robbery. Unreliable and contradictory, evidence that Darius Wesley better matched the actual robber's description. Speculative and prejudicial. Financial connections between Wentworth Hargrove and the DA, irrelevant to the charges. Statistical analysis of Hargrove's sentencing patterns. Insulting to the court and inadmissible. Alterations to police reports. Administrative errors not relevant to guilt. Meanwhile, every prosecution motion was granted. Marcus's participation in community protests against Wentworth's development. Shows motive and prior connection. A 15-year-old disciplinary note from Marcus's college days for a dormitory noise violation. Establishes pattern of disregard for rules. Testimony from a cell informant, claiming Marcus confessed, relevant and admissible. Manipulated photo, lineup procedures, standard police practice. Edited versions of witness statements with exculpatory comments removed, streamlining for clarity. By the end of the hearing, Marcus's defense had been gutted. Nearly all exonerating evidence was excluded, while dubious prosecution claims were welcomed. The trial would present a completely distorted reality to the jury. During a recess, Marcus whispered to Simone, "They're not even pretending this is fair." "We expected this," she replied quietly. "We're building a record for appeal, and the more blatant their bias, the stronger our case becomes for outside intervention." As they prepared to leave, Simone was approached by a court clerk who whispered, "You should know Judge Hargrove and D.A. Clayton had a private meeting this morning to discuss case strategy. I've worked here 15 years and never seen anything like it." Outside the courthouse, Reynolds confirmed to Simone that he'd observed Clayton entering Hargrove's chambers through a back entrance before proceedings began. "They're not just biased," Reynolds concluded. "They're actively coordinating to ensure conviction." That evening, Simone received another warning, her car window smashed, a manila folder on the seat containing photos of her entering her apartment, getting coffee, meeting witnesses. The message was clear. She was being watched. Rather than intimidating her, the threats crystallized Simone's resolve. If they were this desperate to stop her, she must be uncovering something truly damaging. She called Marcus with an update. The pretrial went as expected badly. But every overreach creates another issue for appeal, another piece of evidence of judicial misconduct. "What about the jury?" Marcus asked. "Will they see through this?" Simone hesitated. "Jury selection starts tomorrow. Given Hargrove's patterns, I expect they'll try to eliminate any black jurors or anyone with education or critical thinking skills. We need to prepare for a hostile panel." After hanging up, Simone noticed a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage level 3, 10 minutes. Come alone if you want to help your client." Against her better judgment, Simone went. In the dimly lit garage, she found Detective Rodriguez, a veteran officer she'd encountered in previous cases. "I can't be seen talking to you," he said nervously. "But this has gone too far. Murphy planted that evidence. I've seen him do it before, but never this blatantly. There's a second set of fingerprint results that was never filed. The real robbers' prints were identified, but the file disappeared. Will you testify?" Simone asked. Rodriguez laughed bitterly. "And lose my pension? Have evidence planted in my house?" Tobit check case number 2019 CR 4875. Similar pattern, same players. The defendant is still in prison despite evidence of innocence. Connect the dots, you'll find at least a dozen cases. Before leaving, he added, "Murphy, Clayton, and Hargrove call themselves the Commission. They target people who cause problems for their business associates. Marcus wasn't random, he was chosen." "Teacher by day, armed robber by night?" The headline of the Jefferson County Gazette screamed in bold print above Marcus's mugshot. The article beneath detailed the overwhelming evidence against the seemingly respectable teacher, while mentioning his history of anti-authority positions and confrontational stance toward business development. Similar stories saturated local media. The narrative was consistent. A dangerous criminal had been hiding behind a teacher's respectable facade. Marcus's 12 years of outstanding teaching evaluations, community service awards, and mentorship. Programs were either ignored or twisted to suggest he had cultivated a public image to hide criminal tendencies. His work opposing predatory development in low-income neighborhoods was reframed as anti-police activism and hostility to economic progress. Anonymous sources quoted in multiple outlets described him as intimidating, aggressive, and harboring grudges against successful white businessmen. Watching from jail, Marcus felt his carefully built life being dismantled. "They're not just trying to convict me," he told Simone during a visit. "They're erasing who I actually am." Social media amplified the character assassination. Carefully crafted posts, many from newly created accounts, shared misleading information about Marcus's case and background. Coordinated hashtags like "teacher turns robber" and "Marta classroom criminal" trended locally. Simultaneously, puff pieces about Judge Hargrove portrayed him as a no-nonsense defender of law and order with an impartial commitment to justice. D.A. Clayton was featured in a prominent profile, highlighting his dedication to victims' rights and tireless pursuit of dangerous criminals. The racial dynamics were barely disguised. Comment sections filled with thinly veiled racist assumptions about Marcus's guilt, while predominantly white commentators praised the justice system for catching criminals regardless of their day jobs. The impact on Marcus's support network was devastating. Roosevelt High School's principal, initially supportive, began distancing himself after receiving anonymous calls questioning the school's judgment in hiring decisions. Several parents demanded their children be removed from classes taught by Marcus's closest colleagues, claiming concerns about influences. Journey faced the most immediate consequences. Once a popular student with excellent grades, she became the target of cruel bullying. Students repeated lies they'd heard at home, calling her armed robber's kid and criminal's daughter. Teachers, who should have protected her, often looked the other way, fearing association with Marcus's case. Despite the pressure, a counter-narrative began emerging in community spaces and alternative media. Local activist groups organized courthouse demonstrations supporting Marcus. Several respected legal blogs questioned the handling of the case. A handful of brave students created a Justice for Mr. Johnson social media campaign, sharing positive stories about their teacher. The community divided largely along racial lines. Many in the black community recognized a familiar pattern of systematic criminalization, while the majority of white residents accepted the official narrative without question. Those few white allies who spoke up for Marcus often faced social ostracism and veiled threats. Marcus's former student Xavier, now a college journalism major, created a detailed website documenting inconsistencies in the case. It included testimony from students who were with Marcus during the alleged robbery, analysis of the biased media coverage, and patterns of questionable cases involving the same judge, detective, and prosecutor. When Xavier's site gained traction, his university housing was mysteriously searched, resulting in a suspicious marijuana discovery and threat of expulsion. The message was clear: support Marcus and face consequences. The Roosevelt High School board called an emergency meeting to discuss the Johnson situation. Despite having no conviction, Marcus was placed on unpaid leave of financial devastation on top of his mounting legal costs. The board chairman, a close friend of Charles Wentworth, pushed through the decision despite objections. Simone's own reputation came under attack. Legal blogs suddenly featured posts questioning her competence and ethics. A bar complaint appeared, filed anonymously, alleging professional misconduct in previous cases. Her previous clients received calls suggesting she had mishandled their cases. "They're trying to isolate us," Simone told Marcus during a jail visit. "Cut off support, destroy credibility, make people afraid to stand with us." "Is it working?" Marcus asked quietly. "Not entirely. For every person who backs away, someone else steps up. People are starting to see the pattern. Julian Reynolds is gathering testimonies from other defendants who faced similar treatment. Dr. Bennett has connected with other forensic experts whose findings were altered. Even some prosecutors are quietly questioning what's happening." The pressure escalated when Journey was brought in for questioning by Detective Murphy, without parental consent or an attorney present. He threatened her with obstruction of justice charges for gathering witness statements and suggested she might be placed in foster care for her own protection while her father's case proceeded. Only the quick intervention of Simone and a family court judge prevented Journey's removal from her home. The attempt to intimidate the teenager backfired, generating sympathy and raising questions about police tactics. As the trial date approached, a small but committed group prepared to attend daily proceedings. They wore buttons, simply reading, "Watch," a reminder that the community was paying attention to what happened in Hargrove's courtroom. Are you disturbed by how easily media narratives can destroy someone's reputation before they even go to trial? Comment number 1 if you believe news outlets should be held accountable for biased reporting that presumes guilt. Like this video if you stand with those brave few willing to question the official story, and subscribe to see how the community responds when the truth begins to emerge. What really happens when powerful figures target someone who stands in their way? The battle for Marcus's reputation may determine the battle for his freedom. The morning of the trial, Jefferson County Courthouse steps filled with media and spectators. Two distinct groups gathered, a small cluster wearing watch buttons and "Justice for Marcus" shirts faced a larger contingent of "Support Our Police" and tough-on-crime supporters mobilized by local talk radio. Inside, jury selection revealed the next phase of the strategy against Marcus. As potential jurors entered, Simone immediately noticed the pool's composition. Out of 60 candidates, only 7 were black in a county that was 30% African American. "The jury pool appears statistically improbable," Simone objected. "We request information about the selection process." Judge Hargrove dismissed her concern without consideration. "The pool is randomly generated by computer. Objection overruled." What followed was a masterclass in systematic exclusion. D.A. Clayton questioned the few black potential jurors extensively, then used peremptory strikes to remove them one by one, offering superficial justifications. For a black female nurse, she seemed distracted and might not pay sufficient attention. For a black male engineer, his analytical background might make him overthink evidence. For a black female teacher, her educational career creates potential bias toward the defendant. For a black male construction manager, his supervisory role suggests he might dominate jury deliberations. Simone objected repeatedly, citing Batson versus Kentucky, which prohibits removing jurors based on race. Each time, Clayton provided a supposed race-neutral explanation that Judge Hargrove immediately accepted without scrutiny. Meanwhile, white potential jurors who expressed explicit bias were deemed acceptable. A white businessman who stated, "I generally trust police over civilians in these situations," was just being honest. A white retiree who admitted, "Crime in this country is mostly committed by minorities," was simply stating a personal view that wouldn't affect impartiality. White homemaker who said, Teachers should set better examples was expressing a reasonable expectation. By day's end, the selected jury comprised 11 white members and one elderly Asian American woman who had repeatedly stated she had difficulty understanding English. Not a single black juror remained, despite Simone's 9 separate Batson challenges. Your Honor, Simone protested, the systematic exclusion of black jurors creates an appearance of bias that undermines public confidence in these proceedings. Judge Hargrove's response was immediate and harsh. Ms. Carter, you are dangerously close to contempt. The jury selection process was fair and impartial. Your insinuations otherwise are inappropriate and unwarranted. The next morning, opening statements revealed the prosecution's strategy. D.A. Clayton painted Marcus as a manipulative criminal who had exploited his position of trust to hide in plain sight while harboring resentment and criminal intent. He promised jurors they would see fingerprint evidence, eyewitness testimony, and the defendant's own actions proving his guilt. Clayton dramatically described the robbery, portraying Charles Wentworth as a terrified victim who looked into the cold eyes of this teacher and saw nothing but hatred and greed. He referenced Marcus's community activism as evidence of anti-business sentiment and personal grudges that motivated the crime. When Simone's turn came, Judge Hargrove interrupted repeatedly, "Move along, counselor," when she described Marcus's teaching record, irrelevant to the charges when she mentioned the alibi witnesses. The jury doesn't need a science lesson, when she began explaining fingerprint analysis problems. Despite the interference, Simone managed to convey key points. Marcus physically couldn't have committed the robbery while teaching. The evidence contained significant inconsistencies, and alternative suspects had never been investigated. As she spoke, she noticed several jurors avoiding eye contact, some already appearing to have made up their minds. She concluded by asking them to follow the evidence, not assumptions, and to remember that our justice system is designed to protect the innocent, not just punish the guilty. The prosecution's first witness was Charles Wentworth himself, immaculately dressed and well-rehearsed. He described a terrifying robbery where a man he definitively identified as the defendant had held him at gunpoint. Clayton led him through emotional testimony about his fear and the lasting trauma of the encounter. During cross-examination, Simone asked, "Mr. Wentworth, isn't it true that you've never met Marcus Johnson before today?" "I saw him during the robbery," Wentworth insisted. "Yet you couldn't identify him in the initial police lineup, correct? You only identified him after Detective Murphy showed you his photo separately." "Objection," Clayton interrupted. "Counsel is mischaracterizing the identification process." "Sustained," Judge Hargrove ruled without allowing Simone to respond. When Simone attempted to question Wentworth about his business dealings near Roosevelt High School and his public conflicts with Marcus over gentrification, Judge Hargrove shut her down completely. "This line of questioning is irrelevant and appears designed to harass the victim. Move on, counselor." The pattern continued with each prosecution witness. Detective Murphy testified confidently about fingerprint matches while Judge Hargrove barred questions about forensic procedures or chain of custody. The technician who claimed to verify the prints was allowed to speak in broad generalizations, while specific questions about methodology were deemed overly technical. The courtroom observer, wearing a watch button, who was taking detailed notes, was removed for distracting the jury, while pro-prosecution spectators were permitted to react visibly to testimony. By the end of the first trial day, Marcus whispered to Simone, "This isn't a trial. It's a performance. They're not even pretending to follow rules." "That's part of our record for appeal," she replied quietly. "Every overreach, every biased ruling is being documented, and people are watching." Outside the courthouse, journalists noted the unusual level of judicial intervention. Legal observers documented dozens of questionable rulings. The watch group grew larger, with more community members attending as word spread about the proceedings. That evening, an unprecedented development. An anonymous court employee leaked audio of Judge Hargrove and D.A. Clayton discussing jury selection, strategy before court. In the recording, Hargrove could be heard saying, "Make sure we get the right kind of jury. You know what I mean." The clip went viral locally, raising serious questions about judicial impropriety. Judge Hargrove opened the next day with a furious denial of impropriety and threats to investigate the criminal breach of courthouse security. But the damage was done. Public scrutiny had intensified, and several legal ethics experts began calling for investigation of the proceedings. The prosecution's case continued with a parade of witnesses whose testimony seemed polished to perfection. The store clerk who supposedly saw Marcus near Wentworth's building identified him with absolute certainty, despite having failed to pick him from a lineup initially. The security guard who reported seeing a tall black man enter the building suddenly had detailed recollections of Marcus's features, clothing, and even suspicious behavior. Most disturbingly, a former student named Tyler Williams testified that Marcus had often talked about wealth redistribution and had expressed negative views about businessmen like Mr. Wentworth. Under Clayton's careful questioning, these classroom discussions about economic inequality were reframed as evidence of criminal intent. Each time Simone attempted to cross-examine effectively, Judge Hargrove intervened. That question calls for speculation. The witness has already answered sufficiently. Move on to a new line of questioning. The most damaging testimony came from Detective Murphy, who projected absolute confidence while describing the evidence. He presented the fingerprint analysis as definitive, the witness identifications as unquestionable, and the investigation as thorough and unbiased. These prints, Murphy stated, pointing to enlarged images, match the defendants with 100% certainty. Science doesn't lie. When Simone attempted to question the methodology, Judge Hargrove cut her off. The jury doesn't need to be confused with technical details. Your Honor, Simone persisted, fingerprint analysis involves subjective interpretation. The jury deserves to understand the limitations. Move on, Counselor, Hargrove snapped. The detective has established his expertise. The prosecution's forensic expert, Dr. Lawrence Payton, testified that the fingerprints found at the scene were indisputably Marcus's. His confident presentation impressed the jury, though his methodology contradicted standard scientific practice. When Simone questioned his failure to document comparison points or follow verification protocols, Judge Hargrove repeatedly sustained objections that she was badgering the witness or unnecessarily complicating simple evidence. A supposed cell informant, Jason Miller, testified that Marcus had confessed to the robbery while in detention. This testimony contradicted jail records showing they were never housed together, but Judge Hargrove blocked Simone from introducing those records as irrelevant administrative details. Throughout these testimonies, Marcus watched the jury. Several nodded along with prosecution witnesses. Others avoided looking at him completely. Only one, an older white woman who had initially seemed most hostile, occasionally frowned during particularly questionable testimony. The surveillance expert testified that footage showing the robbery suspect was unfortunately corrupted precisely during the frames that would have clearly shown the perpetrator's face. When Simone asked about the statistical probability of such selective corruption, Judge Hargrove dismissed the question as speculative. When the prosecution presented a grainy image allegedly showing Marcus entering the building, their enhancement expert testified it was clearly the defendant based on height, build, and gait analysis. Simone's attempts to question the scientific validity of such identification from blurry footage were repeatedly blocked. The most troubling moment came when Clayton introduced Marcus's past. A college administrator testified about a dormitory noise violation from 15 years earlier, presenting it as evidence of disregard for rules and authority. More significantly, Marcus's participation in community organizing against Wentworth's development projects was portrayed as evidence of motive. The defendant had a personal vendetta against Mr. Wentworth, Clayton told the jury. He organized protests, filed complaints, and mobilized opposition to legitimate business activities. When legal means failed, he turned to crime. At each distortion, Marcus wrote notes to Simone, who tried valiantly to correct the record, but faced an increasingly hostile judge. When she attempted to introduce Marcus's actual community work, creating tutoring programs, organizing food drives, establishing scholarship funds, Judge Hargrove deemed it irrelevant character evidence. Outside the courtroom, public opinion began shifting. Legal observers published analyses of the problematic proceedings. Law professors used the trial as a case study in judicial bias. Several former prosecutors publicly questioned the handling of evidence and witness testimony. Most significantly, Dr. Eliza Bennett gave an interview to Julian Reynolds, speaking anonymously about the manipulation of forensic evidence. The fingerprint comparison being presented in court bears no resemblance to my original analysis, she stated. What they're calling science is fiction. As the prosecution neared the conclusion of its case, Clayton called a final surprise witness, Principal George Hammond from Roosevelt High School. Though once Marcus's supporter, Hammond had buckled under pressure from the school board. He testified that Marcus had been increasingly confrontational and had expressed concerning views about economic justice that sometimes bordered on advocating redistribution of wealth. During cross-examination, Simone asked, "Isn't it true that just last month you nominated Mr. Johnson for Teacher of the Year?" "Objection, irrelevant," Clayton shouted. "Sustained," Judge Hargrove ruled immediately. "Isn't it also true," Simone continued carefully, "that you received a call from Charles Wentworth's attorney the day before you agreed to testify?" "Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness and making improper insinuations." "Sustained, Ms." Carter approached the bench immediately. As jurors were excused, Judge Hargrove berated Simone. "One more question along those lines, and I'll have you removed as counsel for professional misconduct." After court adjourned, Marcus asked Simone, "Can they really just lie like this and get away with it?" "Not forever," she answered. "The more outrageous this gets, the more attention it draws. And attention is what corrupt systems fear most." That night, something unexpected happened. A juror contacted the court clerk, reporting that they had received an anonymous letter warning them to make the right decision or face consequences. The prosecution immediately suggested this was intimidation from Marcus's supporters, but the letter's wording suggested otherwise, referring to maintaining our community standards and supporting those who protect us, language similar to pro-prosecution rallies. The incident raised questions about jury tampering, but also created the first crack in Judge Hargrove's control over the proceedings. An outside judge would need to investigate the jury issue, temporarily halting the trial and creating space for additional scrutiny. Has your blood been boiling watching this mockery of justice? Comment number 1 if you see right through the prosecution's manipulation of evidence and witnesses. Like this video if you're amazed by Marcus's composure while facing this blatant railroading, and subscribe to follow the defense's fight against this corrupt system. Will anyone in power finally step up to challenge Judge Hargrove's reign of injustice? Or will Marcus become just another victim of a system designed to crush those who stand against the powerful? The defense is about to take center stage. When court reconvened after the jury tampering investigation, there was a subtle shift in atmosphere. The outside judge had found no conclusive evidence of who sent the threatening letter, but had instructed Judge Hargrove to ensure both prosecution and defense receive equitable treatment. Several legal observers and a judicial conduct representative now sat in the gallery, taking notes. Simone began the defense case by calling Marcus's teaching colleagues. Before they could even enter the courtroom, several reported being approached by Detective Murphy with friendly reminders about perjury penalties. One received a parking ticket outside the courthouse. Another found his teaching license status mysteriously changed to under review online. The intimidation was systematic and effective. Despite these pressures, English teacher Rebecca Lawson testified firmly that Marcus was teaching during the time of the robbery. He was in the classroom from 8 a.m. until 3:15 p.m. I saw him during lunch break and between periods. He never left the building. D.A. Clayton's cross-examination was aggressive. "Isn't it true that you and the defendant are friends, that you socialize outside work, that you share political views?" When Rebecca responded that professional colleagues naturally develop friendships, Clayton suggested she was willing to lie to protect a friend and couldn't possibly account for every minute of his day. Judge Hargrove allowed this badgering while repeatedly interrupting Rebecca's responses with, answer yes or no only, and no elaboration needed. The school security guard who could verify Marcus never left the building suddenly couldn't remember specific details after a visit from Detective Murphy. The surveillance footage from school hallways that would have confirmed Marcus's presence was deemed irrelevant by Judge Hargrove before jurors could see it. When Simone called Marcus's students to testify about his continuous presence in the FAO classroom, Judge Hargrove questioned their reliability directly. How can teenagers possibly pay attention to a teacher's whereabouts for an entire day? Aren't students often on their phones rather than observing their surroundings? Couldn't the defendant have left while you weren't paying attention? This direct challenging of defense witnesses contrasted sharply with his deferential treatment of prosecution witnesses. Dr. Eliza Bennett took the stand despite risks to her career. She testified that the fingerprint analysis presented by the prosecution violated standard scientific protocols. The original prints were partial and smudged, categorized as inconclusive in my analysis. They did not match Mr. Johnson's prints with any scientific certainty. As Dr. Bennett explained the technical problems with the fingerprint claims, Judge Hargrove sighed audibly, checked his watch repeatedly, and interrupted with, "Please keep scientific jargon to a minimum," and the jury doesn't need a technical lecture. During cross-examination, D.A. Clayton attacked Dr. Bennett's credibility, suggesting she had personal grievances against the department and lacked the expertise of their forensic witness despite her superior qualifications and longer experience. When Darius Wesley's former cellmate testified that Wesley had bragged about pulling a job at some rich guy's office and letting some teacher take the fall, Judge Hargrove instructed the jury to disregard the testimony as unreliable hearsay, despite having allowed similar hearsay from prosecution witnesses. The defense's case faced continuous obstruction. School attendance records were ruled inadmissible as potentially falsified. Expert testimony about problems with witness identification procedures was limited to 3 minutes. Alternative suspect evidence was repeatedly blocked as speculative. Character witnesses for Marcus were restricted to yes/no answers about specific questions. Despite these obstacles, the cumulative effect of defense testimony began creating reasonable doubt. Several jurors showed increased skepticism toward the prosecution's case, taking notes during defense presentations and watching Judge Hargrove's interruptions with growing concern. The turning point came when Marcus took the stand in his own defense. Though Simone had warned of risks, Marcus insisted, "I need to speak for myself. The jury needs to hear the truth directly from me." Marcus testified calmly about his teaching career, his community work, and the details of the day in question. He explained his opposition to Wentworth's development projects as principled community advocacy, not personal animosity. "I teach my students that active citizenship means standing up for your community. I've organized tutoring programs, scholarship funds, and food drives. Yes, I opposed Mr. Wentworth's development because it would have displaced hundreds of low-income families without adequate compensation or relocation. That's not a crime. It's civic responsibility." As Marcus described the impact of his wrongful arrest on his daughter Journey, his voice cracked with emotion. "She's 16, facing this alone while I'm locked up. Her grades are suffering. She's being bullied, but she still visits me every week with her head held high, telling me to stay strong." At this display of genuine feeling, Judge Hargrove laughed audibly. "Mr. Johnson, this courtroom isn't a place for dramatic performances. Please restrict yourself to relevant facts." The mockery silenced the courtroom. Several observers gasped. Even D.A. Clayton looked uncomfortable. Marcus met the judge's eyes directly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, my daughter's suffering is a relevant fact to me. It's the consequence of false accusations and a system that presumed my guilt from the moment Detective Murphy walked into my classroom." Judge Hargrove's face flushed with anger. "The jury will disregard the defendant's characterization of these proceedings." D.A. Clayton's cross-examination was merciless, repeatedly attempting to provoke Marcus into an angry response that would confirm racial stereotypes. He brought up the 15-year-old dormitory noise violation repeatedly, asked about Marcus's views on police and authority, and suggested his community organizing showed antisocial tendencies. Throughout the hostile questioning, Marcus maintained his composure. "Mr. Clayton, I teach history. I understand how power can be abused when not held accountable. That doesn't make me anti-authority. It makes me pro-justice." After court adjourned, Simone received another threatening message, photographs of her meeting with witnesses, entering her apartment, sitting in a restaurant with Dr. Bennett. The message was simple. "We're always watching. Back off while you still have a career." That night, someone broke into Marcus's apartment, ransacking Journey's room and leaving a threatening note on her pillow. When Simone requested increased protection for Journey, Judge Hargrove dismissed the break-in as unrelated to these proceedings and likely a routine burglary. Despite these pressures, the defense continued presenting evidence. A forensic technology expert testified about the statistical improbability of surveillance footage being corrupted only during crucial moments. A police procedures specialist detailed how witness identification protocols had been violated. Throughout these testimonies, Judge Hargrove's interruptions and hostile rulings continued, but something had changed. His mockery of Marcus's emotional testimony had crossed a line visible to everyone, including the jury. Several jurors now watched the judge with visible concern, noting his different treatment of prosecution and defense. As the defense case neared completion, Simone prepared her final witnesses, knowing they faced an uphill battle against a system determined to convict, regardless of evidence. Yet public attention to the case had intensified following Judge Hargrove's behavior, creating pressure that even he couldn't entirely ignore. The courtroom was unusually crowded as the defense prepared to call its final witness. News of Judge Hargrove's inappropriate laughter had spread, drawing increased media attention and public interest. Legal observers now filled several rows, documenting every ruling and comment. Simone stood. The defense calls Dr. Raymond Wilson, forensic document examiner. Before Dr. Wilson could take the stand, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A commanding figure in an impeccable suit walked purposefully down the center aisle. The crowd fell silent as Senator Terrence Washington, the state's most prominent black legislator and a former federal prosecutor, entered with two associates carrying legal briefcases. Judge Hargrove's face drained of color. "This court is in session. There will be no disruptions." Senator Washington nodded respectfully. "My apologies for the late arrival, Your Honor. May I approach the bench?" "We're in the middle of proceedings, Senator. Take a seat or leave." Washington remained standing. "I believe it's in the court's interest to hear my request. It concerns matters of judicial conduct directly relevant to these proceedings." The gallery murmured as Judge Hargrove's composure visibly faltered. "Approach," he ordered tersely. As the Senator, Simone, and D.A. Clayton gathered at the bench, Washington spoke quietly but firmly. "William, this stops now. I've filed an emergency petition with the Judicial Conduct Commission. They're convening as we speak. I have evidence of your ex parte communications with the DA's office, financial connections to Wentworth Development, and pattern of discriminatory rulings. The federal prosecutor's office has opened a preliminary civil rights investigation." Judge Hargrove's face contorted. "You have no jurisdiction here, Terrence. This is my courtroom." "For now," Washington replied evenly, "but I have affidavits from court staff about your private meetings with Clayton before hearings. I have records of your investments in Pinnacle Corrections Corporation that directly benefit from your high conviction rates of defendants of color. Most damaging, I have documentation of 17 cases with nearly identical patterns of evidence manipulation involving you, Clayton, and Detective Murphy." Clayton interjected nervously, "Your Honor, perhaps a short recess." "No," Hargrove snapped. "Senator Washington is attempting to intimidate this court. I won't allow it." Washington remained unruffled. "Then I'll be forced to present this evidence to the Judicial Commission this afternoon. I should note that several national news organizations are awaiting my statement after court today. The spotlight on this case is about to become very bright." Something in Washington's tone made Hargrove hesitate. "What do you want?" "A fair trial, nothing more, nothing less." That means no more blocking defense evidence, no more coaching prosecution witnesses, no more mockery of the defendant, and absolutely no more coordinating with the DA's office outside proper channels. Judge Hargrove glared at Washington. You don't know what you're interfering with. I know exactly what I'm interfering with, Washington replied. A pattern of judicial misconduct that has sent dozens of innocent people to prison, a system that treats black defendants as presumptively guilty. A mockery of justice that has gone unchallenged for too long. After a tense moment, Judge Hargrove dismissed the jury for an early lunch and cleared the courtroom except for essential personnel. In the emptied courtroom, Senator Washington revealed his history with Hargrove. We attended law school together. I've watched your career with increasing concern. This isn't your first case with these patterns, but I'm making sure it's your last. So you have no idea the forces you're challenging, Hargrove warned. I understand perfectly, Washington countered. The intersection of racial bias, financial incentives, and corrupted justice. This goes beyond one case or one defendant. It's about a system that's been weaponized against communities of color. When court reconvened, something had shifted. Judge Hargrove, while clearly seething, permitted defense witnesses to testify with minimal interruption. Dr. Wilson presented his analysis of the signature on the evidence log, demonstrating it had been altered after initial filing. For the first time, the jury heard expert testimony without constant judicial interference. More dramatically, Dr. Bennett returned to present her original forensic reports documents that completely contradicted the prosecution's fingerprint claims. These prints were analyzed as inconclusive in my original report. They were insufficiently detailed for positive identification, and certainly not the 100% match claimed by the prosecution. The jury listened intently as Dr. Bennett explained how forensic results had been manipulated. Several jurors took detailed notes, their expressions increasingly troubled. The most damaging testimony came when Detective Rodriguez took the stand, visibly nervous but determined. He testified about witnessing Detective Murphy plant evidence, manipulate witness statements, and coach the eyewitness to identify Marcus despite initial uncertainty. Murphy told the witness to help us put this guy away and showed him Marcus's photo repeatedly before the lineup. When the witness still seemed uncertain, Murphy said, "Trust me, this is our guy. Just point him out and you'll be done with this." Whole thing. D.A. Clayton's cross-examination was unusually subdued, as if he sensed the changing dynamics. Senator Washington's presence and the judicial observers created accountability that had been notably absent before. During the afternoon recess, Washington introduced Marcus and Simone to federal investigators who had been quietly gathering evidence about the pattern of cases involving Hargrove, Clayton, and Murphy. "They've been investigating for months," Washington explained. "Your case broke the pattern open because of Journey's documentation and the community attention it generated." When proceedings resumed, Judge Hargrove announced in a strained voice, "In light of new evidence, this court will permit the defense to recall witnesses previously limited in testimony." The school's security footage, previously deemed irrelevant, was now admitted, clearly showing Marcus in the building throughout the day of the robbery. Student witnesses were allowed to testify fully about his continuous presence in the classroom. Financial connections between Wentworth, Hargrove, and Clayton were entered into evidence. Most dramatically, the surveillance footage from Wentworth's building was re-examined by an independent expert. The corrupted portions miraculously became viewable, revealing a perpetrator who looked nothing like Marcus, but strongly resembled Darius Wesley, the alternative suspect the defense had identified. As the day ended, the prosecution's case lay in shambles. Multiple instances of evidence tampering had been exposed. Witness intimidation had been documented. The financial motives behind Marcus's targeting had been revealed. That evening, Senator Washington held a press conference explaining his intervention. "Today, we witnessed the difference between a railroad and a trial. For 3 weeks, Marcus Johnson faced a system designed to convict him regardless of evidence. That changed only when unprecedented scrutiny forced accountability. How many others without such attention have been wrongfully convicted? How many innocent people are sitting in prison because they lacked the resources or publicity to fight back? The press conference triggered a cascade of revelations. Other defendants from Judge Hargrove's court came forward with similar stories. Former jurors expressed concerns about cases they now questioned. Court employees began sharing their observations of judicial misconduct. Inside the detention center, Marcus received an unexpected visitor, Charles Wentworth himself, looking significantly less confident than during his testimony. "I made a mistake," Wentworth admitted reluctantly. "I never saw who robbed me clearly. Murphy told me you were definitely the guy, showed me your picture repeatedly before the lineup. He mentioned your opposition to my development project, suggested you had a vendetta against me. I went along with it." "Why are you telling me this now?" Marcus asked. "Because Washington's investigators are digging into everything. Better to come clean voluntarily than be caught in a lie. For what it's worth, I'm withdrawing my identification testimony tomorrow." As Wentworth left, Marcus realized the power of accountability. The same system that had nearly crushed him now faced scrutiny it couldn't easily escape. The next morning, headlines across the state announced, "Federal investigation into judicial misconduct and corruption allegations, Rock County Courthouse." National news organizations had picked up the story, framing it as emblematic of systemic racism in the justice system. Before court convened, 3 significant developments occurred. First, D.A. Clayton filed a motion requesting to be recused from the case, citing newly discovered conflicts of interest, a transparent attempt to distance himself from the imploding prosecution. Second, Detective Murphy was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Third, and most surprisingly, Charles Wentworth issued a public statement recanting his identification of Marcus Johnson. When Judge Hargrove entered the courtroom, gone was the arrogant demeanor of previous weeks. Under the watchful eyes of judicial conduct investigators, media, and Senator Washington, he moved mechanically through the proceedings, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. The day's first witness stunned the courtroom. Gloria Richards, Judge Hargrove's former court clerk, testified about a pattern of case manipulation stretching back years. She described a formal system where certain defendants, primarily educated black men who had challenged local power structures, were flagged for special handling. There was a list, Richards testified, cases that received different treatment. Judge Hargrove, D.A. Clayton, and detectives from a specific unit would meet privately to discuss strategy. Evidence that contradicted their narrative would be ruled inadmissible. Defense witnesses would face unusual scrutiny. Prosecution witnesses received coaching. Jury selection was manipulated to exclude black jurors. Richards presented documentation she had secretly copied before leaving her position lists of targeted defendants, notes from strategy meetings, records of financial arrangements between courthouse officials and private prison contractors. These private prisons paid kickbacks based on occupancy rates, she explained. Higher conviction rates meant more money flowing to investors, including Judge Hargrove and D.A. Clayton, through shell companies. As Richards testified, investigators served search warrants at the offices of Pinnacle Corrections Corporation, seizing financial records linking courthouse officials to prison profits. Simultaneously, teams executed warrants at the homes of Judge Hargrove, D.A. Clayton, and Detective Murphy. The courtroom fell silent as Richards described specific cases. 18. Black defendants convicted under nearly identical circumstances as Marcus. All had opposed powerful interests in some way. All had faced suddenly discovered evidence, questionable witness identifications, and systematically excluded defense evidence. All were serving lengthy sentences in private facilities connected to Hargrove's investments. It wasn't just racism, though that was part of it, Richards explained. It was about silencing people who challenged power. Marcus Johnson organized his community against predatory development. James Washington created a tenants' rights organization. Michael Taylor investigated pollution from a chemical plant. Each threatened financial interests connected to the court's inner circle. Following Richards came a parade of former defendants with similar stories. Jerome Williams described being convicted of assault, despite security footage showing he was elsewhere. Anthony Parker recalled evidence emerging at the last minute that contradicted his alibi witnesses. Samuel Rodriguez detailed how his jury had been systematically stripped of Hispanic members. Financial records revealed the full extent of corruption. Judge Hargrove and D.A. Clayton both held investments in Pinnacle Corrections Corporation through shell companies. Each new inmate from their jurisdiction generated approximately $40,000 annual revenue. With an average of 45 convictions yearly from Hargrove's court alone, the financial incentive was substantial. More disturbing were the connections to private development interests. Companies including Wentworth Development had systematically targeted properties in neighborhoods where community organizing had emerged. When legal opposition arose, key organizers frequently faced criminal charges in Hargrove's courtrooms. Evidence mounted, Judge Hargrove grew increasingly agitated. During afternoon testimony about financial connections, he suddenly banged his gavel. "This court is in recess until tomorrow morning. All parties are ordered to prepare arguments regarding mistrial." Simone immediately recognized the strategy, declaring mistrial would prevent further evidence from emerging in open court and might allow the prosecution to retry Marcus under more controlled circumstances. She filed an emergency motion opposing mistrial, arguing that the integrity of the justice system required full public disclosure of the emerging pattern. Senator Washington supported this with an amicus brief detailing the public interest in transparency. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered with signs reading, "No more railroads" and "Justice for all, not just the wealthy." Former defendants from Hargrove's court shared their stories with media outlets. Community organizers who had faced questionable charges connected the dots between their activism and subsequent prosecution. That evening, federal authorities took an unprecedented step. Citing evidence of systematic civil rights violations and corruption of judicial processes, they assumed jurisdiction over the case. A federal judge issued orders freezing financial assets connected to the scheme and appointed a special prosecutor to review all convictions from Hargrove's court over the past 5 years. For Marcus, the development meant both hope and new danger. The evidence of his innocence was overwhelming, but powerful interests now faced potential criminal charges. Those same interests had already demonstrated willingness to fabricate evidence, intimidate witnesses, and manipulate the system. "They're desperate now," Simone warned during an emergency consultation. "Before they just wanted to convict you. Now they need to discredit this entire investigation. That makes you an even bigger threat." Her warning proved prescient when Marcus was attacked in detention that night, a coordinated assault by multiple inmates that left him hospitalized with a concussion and broken ribs. Only the intervention of a guard sympathetic to his case prevented worse injuries. From his hospital bed, Marcus faced a difficult choice. Federal prosecutors offered him immediate release and witness protection in exchange for testimony against the corrupt network. The alternative was remaining in the system while the case proceeded, exposed to ongoing danger from those who needed to silence him. "If I take the deal and disappear, what happens to the other defendants still serving time?" Marcus asked Simone. "What happens to the next person they target? Does the system just continue with new players?" "Your first responsibility is to yourself and Journey," Simone reminded him. "You can't fix a broken system alone." "But I can be part of starting that change," Marcus replied. "History teaches us that systems don't reform themselves. People have to stand up and demand accountability, even at personal cost." As Marcus recovered, public pressure intensified. Law professors published analyses of the case highlighting systematic abuses. Civil rights organizations filed class action lawsuits on behalf of defendants convicted under similar circumstances. Retired judges called for comprehensive review of Hargrove's cases. The system that had nearly crushed Marcus now faced unprecedented scrutiny. The question remained whether that scrutiny would lead to meaningful change or just cosmetic adjustments before returning to business as usual. 3 weeks after Senator Washington's dramatic courtroom entrance, Marcus Johnson stood outside the Jefferson County Courthouse, finally a free man. The federal judge who had assumed jurisdiction over the case had dismissed all charges with prejudice, citing overwhelming evidence of innocence and profound misconduct by state officials. The morning sun illuminated the crowd gathered to witness this moment. Family, students, community members, and media. Journey stood beside her father, tears streaming down her face despite her determined smile. "Today isn't just about my freedom," Marcus told the assembled reporters. "It's about acknowledging a system that presumed my guilt because of my race and targeted me because I dared to challenge power. My case isn't unique, it's just one that happened to receive attention and resources that others don't." The federal investigation had expanded far beyond Marcus's case. Judge Hargrove, D.A. Clayton, and Detective Murphy faced multiple federal charges including civil rights violations, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and racketeering. Their financial assets had been frozen, and the investigation now encompassed dozens of previous cases with similar patterns. The private prison corporation connected to the scheme faced civil and criminal proceedings. Wentworth Development was under investigation for bribery of public officials and fraudulent business practices. Charles Wentworth himself had struck a cooperation agreement to avoid prosecution. For Marcus, vindication came with complex challenges. His apartment had been rented to new tenants during his incarceration. His teaching position remained in limbo pending school board review. His savings had been depleted by legal costs. Most significantly, his name had been publicly dragged through months of character assassination. "The system is designed to break you even when you're innocent," Marcus reflected. "The financial cost, emotional trauma, and reputation damage don't disappear with a dismissed case." Nevertheless, he found unexpected support. A community fundraiser covered temporary housing and expenses. Several prestigious law firms offered pro bono assistance with employment reinstatement and potential civil claims. Most meaningfully, his students organized a welcome-back celebration, making clear their continued respect and trust. As media attention intensified, Marcus faced pressure to become a public spokesperson against systemic injustice. Senator Washington urged him to testify before legislative committees considering judicial reform. Civil rights organizations invited him to headline fundraising events. Publishers approached him about book deals. Initially reluctant, Marcus gradually embraced this unexpected platform, recognizing its potential impact. "I spent years teaching students about civil rights history," he explained to Simone. "Now I have the opportunity to participate in creating that history, to turn my experience into something that might prevent others from facing the same injustice." His first significant action was establishing a coalition with other victims of the corrupt system. Together they created the Justice Reform Initiative, dedicated to reviewing questionable convictions, advocating for independent oversight of prosecutors and judges, and providing support for families of the wrongfully imprisoned. The initiative's first success came when 5 defendants convicted under similar circumstances to Marcus had their cases reopened. All 5 were eventually exonerated, as evidence manipulation and misconduct came to light. Their releases generated further attention to the pattern of abuse. 6 months after his exoneration, Marcus testified before the state legislature's Judicial Oversight Committee. His measured, articulate testimony contrasted sharply with the criminal caricature that had been presented in court and media. "What happened to me wasn't just about individual bad actors," he explained to legislators. "It reflected systemic problems that require systemic solutions. When judges face no meaningful oversight, when prosecutors are rewarded for convictions rather than justice, when police face no consequences for misconduct, the result is predictable. The question isn't why this happened, but why we've allowed it to continue." His testimony contributed to landmark legislation, creating an independent judicial conduct commission with actual enforcement authority, mandatory recording of all judicial proceedings, stronger discovery requirements for prosecutors, and financial disclosure requirements for judges. Marcus's civil lawsuit against the county, police department, and individual officials resulted in substantial settlements. Rather than keeping the funds, he established a scholarship foundation for children of incarcerated parents, with Journey serving on the selection committee. Perhaps most significantly, Marcus eventually returned to teaching, now incorporating criminal justice reform into his history curriculum. His students benefited from his first-hand experience with systemic injustice and the importance of civic engagement. History isn't just what happened in the past, he told his first class after returning. It's what we're creating today through our actions or inaction. When systems fail, change doesn't come from those with power suddenly becoming enlightened. It comes from people standing up, speaking truth, and demanding better. The courthouse where Marcus had faced such hostility underwent its own transformation. With Judge Hargrove removed and under federal indictment, a reformist judge took over. His docket. Case records were opened for review by independent attorneys. New protocols were implemented for jury selection to prevent discrimination. Court observers became a regular presence, documenting proceedings for transparency. 3 years after his exoneration, Marcus stood before a different audience, a national conference on criminal justice reform. His keynote address reflected on the painful journey and unexpected purpose it had created. "My story could have ended differently," he acknowledged. "Without Senator Washington's intervention, without media attention, without community support, I might still be serving time for a crime I didn't commit. My privilege was having resources and allies that many defendants lack. The true measure of justice isn't how the system treats those with advantages, but how it treats the most vulnerable. For every case like mine that gains attention, countless others remain hidden. Our work isn't finished until justice doesn't depend on privilege, publicity, or power." As Marcus concluded his address, the audience rose in standing ovation. In the front row sat Journey, now a college student studying law with plans to become a civil rights attorney. Beside her was Simone Carter, whose law practice now specialized in wrongful conviction cases. And throughout the room were faces connected to Marcus's journey: exonerated defendants, reform advocates, community organizers, and students inspired by his example. The system that had nearly destroyed him had instead created a powerful advocate for change. The teacher had become something more: a living lesson in justice, resilience, and the ongoing struggle for equality under law. As Marcus often told his students, justice isn't something that exists naturally. It must be created and protected through constant vigilance and courage. The arc of the moral universe may bend toward justice, but only when enough hands join together to bend it. Marcus Johnson's story serves as a powerful reminder that justice is not automatically guaranteed by our legal system. His case illustrates how racial bias, corruption, and financial incentives can transform courts from protectors of rights into weapons against vulnerable communities. When judges, prosecutors, and police operate without accountability, innocent lives are destroyed, while true criminals remain free. The lesson is clear. Justice requires constant vigilance from all of us. One person speaking truth to power can inspire others, creating momentum for change. Marcus's transformation from victim to advocate demonstrates how personal tragedy can fuel systemic reform when courage meets opportunity. His experience teaches us that the most dangerous threat to justice isn't just explicit racism, but the complacency that allows such systems to operate unchallenged. True justice demands more than symbolic gestures or occasional interventions. It requires transparent processes, independent oversight, and communities willing to stand witness when power is abused. Most importantly, it reminds us that history is not just what we study, it's what we create through our actions or inaction every day. Has Marcus's story changed how you view our justice system? Comment below with the #1 change you'd implement to make courts more equitable for all Americans. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, hit that like button to support stories that expose injustice. Subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge us to build a better system, and share this video with someone who needs to understand the human cost of judicial bias. Thank you for bearing witness to Marcus's journey together. We can bend that arc toward justice a little further each day.